Cup of Go for December 15th, 2023. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in 15 minutes per week. I'm Shai Nechmad.
And I'm Jonathan Hall. Welcome to the final episode of the year.
Yeah, it's time to, deck the hall. That sounds like beating you up.
Yeah, that's been my family joke for decades.
Well, my name is Nechmad, which means literally nice. So,
so I don't have to be fearful.
We both have nouns for, well, actually you have a noun, I have an adjective. Together we make a nice hall.
Ching.
All right. We have a whole bunch of stuff to get into today, so let's just kick it off.
Let's do it.
Crypto SSH.
Yeah, there's a security vulnerability that's being fixed on Monday. If you use the golang.org/x/crypto/SSH package, don't sleep until Monday because you need to upgrade as soon as that release comes out. We don't know what it is. Secret security fix. We will talk about it next year.
Next year.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. But just make sure to mark your calendars. If you're doing an advent calendar, then you get on Monday, you get a chocolate and an upgrade.
Awesome. Which is better?
Oof. I don't really like chocolate because I can't do milk or white chocolate. So it's just like bitter. So I guess they're both bitter and adult things. If I have more questions about Go, where should I go to? Like this crypto SSH stuff like that, it sounds very complicated. I want to look for some information. Where should I go?
The Go Wiki is a great place to go, except it's not really a wiki anymore. You may recall we talked about the proposal to move the wiki from GitHub to go.dev several months ago. It's finally happened. The good news is that means it's more searchable. Google's going to find it. So if you go looking for some article in the Go Wiki, and you never find it because GitHub pages are not indexed or GitHub wikis are not indexed, that will not be a problem anymore.
And I think that the searchability is super, super important.
Mm-hmm.
And also, in general, investing in documentation is almost always worth it. Also, this page is a really good, just a bunch of links kind of thing. I really, really like it. Like you open the page, I think there are about 150 links here to books, blogs, best practices, what is error handling, testing. Sounds like there's a lot of Go books that might teach you how to learn Go, which we'll get into later in the show.
Mm-hmm.
But this looks like a really, really good page to just go to. And I also like that the fourth thing listed on the page is the community, which we mention again and again. But one of the strongest things about this language is the community around it. That's kind of supportive. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can always find a gopher in your area to talk to, whether it's online or in person. So there's a lot of links here, including the subreddit, which I would rank a lot lower, but I guess they think it's a valid part.
One really important link that goes back to something we talked about a few weeks ago. There's a link about how they do code review on the Go project. And the very first section is reviewer parlance. And they define what SGTM means. They say it sounds good to me. Unfortunately, they're wrong because we know now from Josh on our own Slack channel that it actually means silently giggling to myself.
Yeah, there were a bunch of good options, but definitely silently giggling to myself was the best one. But I still like smells good to me because it means that your code doesn't have any code smells, like duplicated code.
I like it.
Okay, so I marked myself Monday to update SSH, and until Monday, I'll go read the new wiki. What should I do on Tuesday then?
On Tuesday, 1.22 RC1 is coming out.
Oh my God.
Yes. And we have the draft of the changelog is out. It's full of a bunch of to-dos. It's very incomplete, but you can go read it if you haven't been following along, or if you forgot half the stuff like I did, go read it to see what's going to be new in February.
I'm going to not read it. I'm going to keep myself a bit in the dark. Because I think I already know all the proposals just because we covered a lot of proposals during this half year. And I'll wait to see until they figure out, RC2 and whatever.
Cool.
Until all the interesting things are hashed out. All the interesting bugs, I mean.
Yeah.
But if you like, tinkering with stuff, you have like a hobby project, you don't mind if it crashes, or you really, really want to check out one of the new features, using the RC versions is a really, really good way for the Go project to get some field time and see if it find bugs and whatever. It's a really, really good contribution to the community. We mentioned a lot of extra contributions to open source today, right?
Yeah.
Documentation is one of them. And just using the thing and reporting bugs is also phenomenally important. So if you have the time.
So I'm sorry, Shai, I'm going to spoil one thing for you from the release notes because I know you're going to like this one.
Mm-hmm.
They have improved PGO, profile guided optimization, even more than they did in the past.
Woohoo!
They report anywhere from 2 to 14% performance improvement just by turning on PGO now.
That's amazing. I'll quote the IBM Pollyanna principle here, which is that machines should work, people should think. Machines should do all the hard work, leaving us to think. Let's move all the hard, annoying work of optimization to the compiler, and let's just think about what software we want to write.
Let's do it.
Well, you spoiled one thing for me, but it put me in a good mood. It's a really good thing.
Speaking of thinking.
Yeah. We want to mention a few proposals and just things we talked about in the past. So we're going to be pretty brief. The links are in the show notes, but if you listen to past episodes, you should be fine. And if not, the links are in the show notes. Yeah. So the first thing we want to cover is override constants at compile time. If you remember, we talked about this proposal that I didn't like. I downvoted, and we sort of had a joke about, do you want to bet if it goes away or not? So it's closed with really good reasoning. Based on the discussion, it's just too complicated and also possible to do with Go build. And, it doesn't, SGTM doesn't smell good to me. So...
It doesn't make you giggle?
No, not too much. So there's no way to override constants in compile time, which is good, I think. The proposal was declined. We don't usually talk about declined proposal. Where can it go from being declined? Can it be reopened? What happens when a proposal goes to decline?
So generally what happens when a proposal is declined is it's just dead. Although, generally speaking, that same proposal will not be resurrected. However, if you have a new alternative version that solves the same problem, that does come up. And I almost put it in this week's backlog, but I didn't, but I'll mention it now. There was a proposal to add a zero function to the standard library, or a built-in, to kind of replace some of the functionality that was declined in the zero proposal we talked about previously. So that's an example of the zero proposal was declined. An alternative implementation was proposed. It was also ultimately declined, but that can happen. So, if somebody comes up with an alternative way to solve the problems with compile time constants, it might be resurrected, or maybe in a couple of years we'll decide that we were wrong about the decision here and someone will reopen a proposal. Yeah,
when I'm opening the README on the proposal process and you go to the decline section, there's a few options here. Something can be declined because it's duplicate, which makes sense. We don't want two proposals on the same thing because we want to consolidate the discussion. Something can be declined as infeasible, like directly contradicts the core design of the language. I think this is more on this camp. This is just infeasible for Go because when you have a const, you want to trust that it does the thing that it does. Can be retracted. Just someone saying, hey, what I proposed wasn't good. I'm retracting it. And it can be obsolete. Like if the language changed enough. I imagine when generics got in, a lot of proposals were declined as obsolete just because such a major change to the language meant they weren't necessary anymore. Just as an example. So there's a whole lot of options here. We usually don't talk about declined proposals. So I just want to shed some light into that process as well. Because when something gets accepted, right, we know what's going to happen. They're going to write the code and they're going to test it. They're going to introduce some bugs. Jonathan's going to discover them. And, that's just how the cookie crumbles. Yeah. But on this case, it was declined. And I think it's declined is infeasible. So I don't see it popping up again. We have another one, right?
Yeah. So we also talked about this, I think, last week as well. The proposal to add localization internationalization support to GoDoc. This one has also been declined. And for a reason that's a little bit unusual, I think. I mean, it's not one that I see cited that often. And the basic reason it's been declined is a lack of resources on the Go team to build and support this feature.
Yeah, this is just, I think the maintenance cost for the future it can be exponential, right? Because if you support a single language and you support English, then you support a single language. But if you support multiple languages, every single language you add is like a multiplier on the entire maintenance window. And, you probably need someone who speaks Chinese on the Go team to feel comfortable, right? Someone who speaks Arabic, someone who speaks, German, et cetera, et cetera. That's just a really big commitment. So that was declined as well, but just due to resources. We wanted this to go on. I wonder if the community can make it happen. If it doesn't work with, internal Go team, maybe there's enough community power to add an IDE plugin to the LSP that, just shows you the local, according to your machine's locale, the correct documentation and tries to, auto translate it on your machine, something like that.
Yeah, that'd be nice. If you know of a project like that, let us know. We'd love to hear about it. We'd love to talk about it on the show.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, both of us know English. Some better than others, I would say.
Well, we're both at least bilingual, though.
Yeah, I'm getting better in my Russian. I don't want to brag on the show, but I have 309 days in my Duolingo streak.
Nice.
And 2 visits to the Diamond League. So I'm
So you're trilingual because you speak Hebrew, obviously, as well.
Yeah, and маленький по-русски.
Okay.
Нет хороший.
And I speak Spanish fairly well and a little bit of Portuguese, although that's getting worse every day because I don't practice it.
You need to start practicing Hebrew then.
There we go. Didn't have enough to do in the week.
One thing you said, support localization and internalization. Aren't those different things?
Yes.
Like one is from the vendor and one is from on the client side?
Yeah, so internationalization is the adding the ability in your code to support multiple languages or locales. It could be currencies or whatever. Localization is then creating the local version of that for each locale or each language that you want. So they're two sides of the same coin.
So what we actually ask from the Go team is internalization infrastructure and support for localization in like one or two languages other than English, just to make the infrastructure worth it.
Probably, yeah.
All right. I got it. It's also spelled, if you sometimes see it online, it's sort of like Kubernetes, where it's K8S. So internationalization is 118N, which is just...
I18N, yeah.
What did I say?
You said 118N.
That would be even more complicated. That's why smarter people than me do internationalization. All right. One last thing we want to mention. If you remember, we talked about dead code a whole bunch. We mentioned it. Jonathan's been using it in production already for a while from the experimental package, and it's slowly been sneaking its way into more standard processes. And now we have a blog post about it as well, finding unreachable functions with dead code, which was released like 3 days ago. And instead of going through the blog post and trying to skim through it, I'll just say the example because it's very, very understandable in my opinion. What happens if you have a helloer and a goodbyer, but you never call the goodbyer in your code? If you run dead code, it's going to say, hey, the function goodbye is unreachable, which is just great feedback because it's going to like mark it in your IDE as like grayish. And you can just delete dead code, which I really like. One thing I'm wondering, maybe you face this in your usage already. Sometimes you do tend to have code that is unreachable, but you want to keep it because you're like, stacking a bunch of pull requests together, and you don't really want to delete everything that is dead code because like tomorrow you're going to fix that, right? Did you run into that edge case while working with dead code?
I have.
How do you circumvent that?
I often just create like a blank variable that references it or calls it with a comment, dead code defeat or something like that.
I'm wondering because you wouldn't want to mark it as, you don't want to develop something that uses it because that's just more dead code to delete later.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you don't want it to be a warning because if there's dead code, there's dead code. I'm wondering if it's a better tool to run periodically on main rather than be a part of the lint and like run it all the time. Like just run it once a week on main and then clean up. Like open up small pull request that cleans up. That might be better.
One potential problem with that might be that maybe it's temporary or it's something you've created that you're not using yet, and you've created that. I come along and I clean it up, and then now you go back and like, where did it go? So that could be a problem. It would be better if you could just tell the dead code eliminator that this is temporary. I'll be adding the thing that calls it on Tuesday.
Yeah, I assume there's probably some way to mark it as such, and the easiest way is just to run it from some temporary main. And
you can do that.
Most libraries have tests as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want, you can run dead code with -test as well. So I guess an easy way is to make sure you have good test coverage.
Yeah.
And then when you run it with -test, it checks from like a Go test as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, generates a bit more coverage if you have more tests. So a good way to mark it could be to have an empty test. It just calls it does nothing.
You could do that. Yeah.
Or if you're even a better developer, write the test ahead of time, right?
Hey, that's an idea.
So go check out the blog post and, start just integrating dead code into your code bases. Could be a good idea.
All right. Well, we have just a couple more things to round out the year's news. One, you may recall I had a conversation a few weeks ago with Manuel de la Peña, the maintainer of the Go test containers package. He has a new boss, apparently. Docker has acquired...
He's going to have a whale of a time. Sorry, it took me a second to find it, but it was there. Oh, no, they did it as well. The blog is called Docker Whale Comes Atomic Jar.
So there we have it. So Docker is acquiring Atomic Jar, or the makers of test containers. So there's a big blog post about it with some FAQs. You can go read it. It's not a big blog post. It's a short blog post, but you can go read it. But it seemed relevant to mention since we've been talking about test containers. I use test containers on, I think, 3 projects right now, 1 open source project and two of my clients' projects. I think it's a great project. It makes testing easier, especially when I write my tests first.
And
cool.
if you're using it like Jonathan, from reading the FAQ, it seems like they were very concerned about short and medium term. Nobody has to worry. It's going to stay open source. And if you use test containers cloud, you're going to be fine. There are no plans to discontinue. So it sounds like at least the person who made this purchase knows how to handle the projects that are incoming. But, as always with these sorts of M&As, it's worth keeping an eye out on test containers, seeing if it's a decline because it's going to Docker and perhaps it's less prioritized, or if it's going to get a boost, right? It gets a really good ecosystem. There are a lot of good people working at Docker, and this sort of shift left focus in a lot of companies, including the company I work for. Everybody's trying to reach to the problems earlier and find them in the code and tell the developers, hey, you need to look here and you need to look there. It seems like Docker are going in that direction as well in other projects, not just Atomic Jar. So could be a really good M&A. I think it's a good fit. Let's hope they don't do the corporate thing and ruin it for everyone.
My prediction is that we will get some great engineering on this project for a couple of years, and then they're going to switch to Go test containers desktop licensing and screw everybody up.
Maybe. If there is, we can always fork. And we already know the playbook by now, right?
Yeah, we know a good group of people to do that.
So we need someone to fork, and we need someone to find a vegan name for it. Like we had Terraform, now we have Open Tofu. We have a test containers, and we could have like
takeaway containers to go with the tofu.
Takeaway containers, nice. So if someone wants to fork because they're already angry about the acquisition, there's your name. You can use it free of charge. And yeah, one last thing we want to mention: takeaway containers. That's really good. Anyway, one last thing we want to mention is books. So Jonathan is more of the technical worm book than I am. I'm still really hard working my way through designing data intensive applications. I'm really digging down and reading every single page and doing the summary and whatever. But while I'm taking my time, Jonathan's been tearing through books. So we have two to mention today. One searchable one, which is Learn Concurrent Programming in Go, which you can just go look up. We also have it in the show notes. What's that book about? It's probably not going to surprise you.
It's about learning concurrent programming with Go.
You just blew my mind.
I know.
I guess one of the important lessons is concurrency is not parallelism, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if it opens with a huge quote of that or something.
Yeah, I don't have my copy yet. I would love to review this book in detail at some point, but I have too many others on my list right now, so it'll be a while.
Well, luckily you have 2 weeks off to catch up, right?
I have plenty of time now. So James Cuttijar, I hope I said that right, wrote this book, released last year from Manning. It looks like a good book. Manning always makes good books, in my opinion, so they're gold mine of good knowledge.
So I think the main, again, with these sorts of books, the main point is to try and take away both general ideas and like a combo of general ideas and some concrete techniques. And it looks like this book tries to walk that balance, at least from the, from the description. You, on the one hand, it tells you about common pitfalls. On the other hand, you learn about patterns. What is pipelining? What is worker pooling? Stuff like that. So that's one recommendation. And the other one is completely unsearchable, which is Learning Go.
Learning Go. So if you want to learn more about this book and what went into it, stick around for the interview. Unfortunately, Shai didn't join the interview because of my screw up in sending the invite from the wrong email address. But I interviewed the author.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I missed it, but I'll listen.
So I had the pleasure of interviewing Jon Bodner, the author of this book. His second edition of Learning Go is coming out in January. The first edition came out in 2021. The second edition has new chapters, 100 new pages, updated information about generics, and a whole bunch of cool things.
And 9 out of 10 animal on the cover.
Yes.
You know how O'Reilly has these pencil drawings of animals on the cover? Really, really good one.
Yeah.
It is just a gopher, right?
It's a gopher.
I think I only know it as a blue animal, but I guess in nature it's not blue.
I think it's a North American pocket gopher. I completely made that up. I have no idea what the species it is, but it's a specific species, I'm sure.
It looks very cute, which is a good thing to put on your...
So stick around for that interview. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us all year. If you're new to the show, we're glad you've joined us. I'll just take a moment to say I've been blown away by the response to the show.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to our second year in it.
Yeah, we might do even a second season thing with a new theme and whatever, we'll see. But we are taking some time off. We will see you again in 2024. So if you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. If you celebrate Novi God, s Novim Godem, anything else, any other
Whatever
New
you
Year
celebrate.
celebration kind
Just
of thing.
happy holidays is the way to cover everything, right?
That's nice. Happy holidays.
Yeah.
And if you're doing Advent of Code, good luck. Don't cheat. Don't use AI. And stick around to hear our ad break in the interview.
We're going to talk about some of our show statistics during the ad break. So if you're curious about that sort of backstage detail, stick around.
Yeah, we'll see you next year.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. All right, welcome to our ad break. If you're a new listener, there's a few places you can check out to connect to the community of the show and talk to us a bit more. And the premier entrance hall to that amazing palace is cupogo.dev. That is cupogo.dev, just a website that has all the links and everything you need. We're mostly hanging out in the Gopher Slack. If you haven't joined the Gopher Slack yet, it's a really good community in general if you're a Gopher. It usually has some location-based channels as well. For example, I'm part of hashtag Israel. Project-based channels as well, like hashtag Benthos or hashtag Fine, hashtag GoKit, and also has some more topic-focused channels like hashtag Performance or hashtag Jobs.
Yeah.
So whatever community or whatever topic you want to connect to in the Go world, that's probably the first location to go to. And we're hanging out at hashtag Cup-A-Go with dashes. That's like kebab case. Cup-O-Go. And if you're an old timer and you just use email, just email us at news@cupago.dev. That is news@cupago.dev. We have new merch out, and you have until the end of the year to use our new coupon code, which is Happy B-Day 14. Because we felt bad that I missed Go's 14th birthday. So that's our way to make up. Thanks to a suggestion from a listener, we have some new swag on the shelf. We have a hoodie and we have a shirt. I haven't received mine yet. Jonathan and our editor, Filippo, have their on their way as well. So if you want to wait for our verdict on it, you can wait until next year and we'll let you know if they're any good or not.
But you won't get the discount then.
That's a
Tough choice.
Tough choice. It's a very generic hoodie. So I would bet it is mediocrely comfortable. We haven't went like space grade materials or anything like that. Just like a normal hoodie. But I think it looks fine, at least in the site generated simulations that we got. So that's all the normal ad break stuff out of the way. But we really, really want to nerd out on some numbers. Give us some numbers.
All right. So let's start with...
This is our Cup-A-Go Wrapped. That's what you're doing right now,
Yeah.
like Spotify, right?
So let's start with what I think is the most important number, which was 4,793. That's how many downloads we had in November. November so far has been our best download month.
Ooh, thank you all.
So I suspect December won't quite hit that mark because we're not doing as many episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking forward to January breaking another record.
Oh, we'll see when we'll start in January. But yeah.
Yeah.
And people picking it back up. But that's a whole bunch of downloads. And if we're talking about all time, we have almost 40,000 at this point.
Another number I think it's worth throwing out there is 517. And that's the number of downloads we've had during the quote release window for the last episode last week, which is another record breaker. We've never had that many downloads. A release window is the first 2 days of the episode release. So last week's episode is on track to break the record as being the most popular episode of all time. So we're definitely on an upward trend. Not every episode is better than the last, but we're on an upward trend.
Yeah, we're trying not to look into the analytics too much and just keep the show interesting in a way that we would find interesting and useful. But I don't know, I guess we're doing something that y'all are liking because the numbers have been going up, which is nice.
Let's talk about some more nerdy numbers.
I have 3 numbers for you.
Okay.
913 plus 818 plus 108. What makes?
It sounds like my gas bill.
So we have published 1,839 minutes of show. So if this is like your first episode, you have like 1,800 hours to catch up on, which is interesting because when I recommend people, hey, go check out my show, whatever, very awkward thing to do in general. Like someone just talked to me at work this week on, oh, I need to do some data stuff in Go, and I'm wondering if it's going to make sense. It's very awkward to be like, oh, I have a podcast where I just talked about it with someone. Just go listen to the recording. It sounds a bit self-aggrandizing. Yeah. But it's just, I just talked to someone about that and recorded it, so you can check it out.
Yeah.
But I usually don't recommend people to go check out the backlog. Do you do that, or do you just tell people to join on the show?
I shouldn't say often, but I have occasionally pointed people to a specific episode where, just like you said, we talked about that topic. So I had that. One of my clients was considering using fast HTTP, so I pointed them to the episode where we had the maintainer who said, "Don't use fast HTTP." So, and I've pointed people to the test containers episode a couple times. So, things like that. I've definitely done that before.
So you don't have to catch up on all the backlog because most of it's news and it might be outdated. But at least the interviews are sort of timeless. Maybe we'll release those as a separate package at some point.
That's not a bad idea.
And there is one more number I'd like to share. We already talked about the channel. We have 271 participants in the channel, which for me is a just ungraspable number. I assume maybe 100 of these people just put the channel on mute. They joined because they wanted to post a thing or just because they thought it was fun, and they'll never look at it again.
Yeah.
That still leaves 171 people who check it out occasionally and clear that notification. And 10 people that other than yourself and I that regularly post and have discussions. So that's a lot of fun. For example, someone quote unquote new, Johan, I guess, on the last episode, we were like, oh, what do you think about Go and simplicity and blah, blah, blah. And he just posted his opinion, and he had a really interesting discussion exactly in the same way where I would sit with a cup of coffee in my office and talk about Go, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So from that big number of 271 participants to a really good talk over coffee over Slack, that's fun. That's good.
I have a couple more numbers to share.
Ooh.
So these are estimates because we don't have numbers on this from all platforms. But I did a cross-reference between Google Podcast, which lets us know how many listen minutes we have on Google Podcast. And I extrapolated that to the number of downloads we've had. So I estimate that we have had 101,086 listen minutes. That's a lot of minutes of people listening to our voices.
Just in general?
Just over the whole thing, yeah.
What's the number again?
101,086.
101,086 listen minutes.
That comes out to 70 days of straight listening to our voices.
I can barely listen to the episode in the car to make sure we didn't have any mistakes.
So thanks to everybody who out there is listening to our voices, listening to us ramble.
70 years of human attention. We appreciate it. Someone really smart said to me once, there's only so much time. Thank you for yours. So thank you for all the time. I have one more thing one more number. You said you have two. So I have one and you have one. I really enjoy looking at the global listener location. Go is very global. We just talked in the episode about the localization efforts, right? And how many people are listening from different countries. And it's really fun to see the breakdown. You have only 30% from the United States, which is less than I would have thought there would be. And a lot of listeners in the EU region. I think maybe someone said once we give an EU perspective on things sometimes, which is, I don't know, I didn't think about it, but I'm not in the US, so maybe it is.
I am an American, but I live in the EU, so I suppose I have an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so we interview people in this time zone normally, and we talk about conferences here sometimes, and I think I talked about it in a recent episode, but the US usually is the default country. All the movies are in New York, all the domains are .com and whatever. So it's fun to see that our audience is very global. And then you go to the top of the list and you see some things that make sense, right? UK, Germany, Canada. Israel is very high up with 2.5%, which makes sense because I'm from here and also it's a big tech country. And the Netherlands is right behind it. So your local community is listening as well. We have a lot of listeners from India, which is fun, 2%. And then, the fun part is also going to the bottom of the list and seeing okay, we have a listener from Bahrain. We have someone from Cayman Islands. We have someone from Jersey, which for some reason is a different country on the statistics. We have people from Monaco. We have someone from Somalia. We have Tunisia. And, just as a side note, Israel is, if you have been living under a rock, is not having a great time right now. It's in a war, and a lot of the countries that listen to this podcast, I can't travel to right now. So I think it's fun to see how common interest in just normal people, I'm not a politician or whatever, can just listen to the show. Because I can't travel to Belarus or Lebanon right now, but we have 0.02% listeners from Lebanon. So, that's fun. What's the last number you wanted to share?
So I'm going to change the tone just slightly. The last number I want to share is 158, which is the number of euros we spend to produce each episode. It's not a huge number, but we pay an editor and we have a few other expenses too. It's probably about 170 euros or something like that. The point of this is, if you're thinking about supporting the show, if you'd like to support the show, buy a t-shirt, buy a mug. It doesn't help a lot, but it helps. The other thing is, if your workplace would be interested in sponsoring some episodes in the coming year, we would love to talk to you about that. We have some packages set up to sponsor a set number of episodes. So we're going to keep doing this, even if we don't get sponsors, even if you don't buy mugs. We enjoy doing this.
Yeah, we would definitely appreciate your support as well. Just think about your company. If your company has a marketing department, it's a good chance to, bridge that gap between engineering and marketing and be that weird person who walks over to all the brightly hair-colored people in marketing and then try to talk to them. Just remember, they are normal humans. They are not developers. So you have to, ask them what's going on and stuff like that. Yeah, so we are actively looking for sponsors. We'll restart the show next year, so you have time to reach out to us about that.
So you could be buying a part of that 101,000 minutes in our listeners' ears if you want.
Yeah, and, from our past sponsors, thanks a lot for jumping on this journey this last year. If you're wondering if the sponsorship is worth it, just go talk to one of our sponsors. And I think first and foremost would be Koya, who supported us quite a lot during the show and are still doing really good work in the serverless world. They're not paying us to say this. I'm a user. So thanks a lot, Koya, for your continued support during this year. It was fun.
It has been a blast. I hope to have another great year next year. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Yeah, next episode is episode number 45. This is episode 44, so it's going to be 45. That's a lot. That's a lot, man. A year of going. We'll see you all next year. So stick around for a super interesting interview with Jon Bodner. And the last note we'll leave you on this super long ad break, which didn't include any ads, is that we are starting to line up interviews for next year. So if you want to come on the show, or if you know someone who you'd like to hear on the show, or a topic or whatever, we're going to put a thread in our Slack channel. Last time that worked really well. We found some super interesting people, which we wouldn't meet regardless, which we wouldn't meet in other ways. So if you want to come on the show, or if you know someone, or if your company's doing Go and wants, some publicity, if you do something interesting, we'll just talk to us. We'll put a specific thread on that on our channel as well. So a good chance to join if you haven't joined already. All right. So stick around for the interview with Jon.
All right.
See y'all.
Welcome to our interview section. I am excited to be joined today by Jon Bodner. Welcome, Jon.
Hey, welcome, Jonathan. Glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here. I feel like I kind of halfway know you. I've read one of your books. We've emailed a few times, but I've never, put a face to the name, live. So it's really great to meet you.
Yeah, same.
So you have the second edition of a popular book coming out, and we're going to talk all about that. But before we do, I'd like to hear a little bit about what you do professionally, how you're involved in Go, how you got involved in Go, what led up to the book.
Sure. So software engineer, my current title is staff engineer. I'm at Datadog. I work on making it easier to onboard customers to our APM tools. I've been doing software engineering professionally since 97. That's too many years for me to count at the moment. 26 years.
It's like 6 or 7, right?
Yeah, it feels like it's like 8 years tops possible. Unbelievable. It happened. Yeah, I've been programming since I was in elementary school, when computers were a lot less. So always loved to do it, and was lucky enough that people would actually pay me to do this. Told my boss that I would actually code for free. But yeah, so been doing Go. The day it was announced, I actually caught like the announcement of Go, like back in 2010.
Okay.
Saying this was all they show, like they can compile the whole standard library in like a couple of minutes. Like, this is kind of neat. And the people who are doing like this could be something. Didn't really get to use it for a few years. That I built like my own Lisp in Go like 8-9 years ago. Not a real Lisp, is like very small. And then probably like 7 years ago was probably the first chance I got to start using it professionally when I was at Capital One. And just since then, been talking about it, been writing about it, and using it. Actually, my day-to-day job, I write some Go, write some C, write some other things. Depends on what the job calls for.
Cool. So you have a book. The first edition came out, I don't remember when, 2020 maybe? I'm kind of guessing.
2021.
2021.
Yeah, March Yeah.
And so the second edition is coming out in January.
Correct.
The book is Learning Go, an idiomatic approach to real-world Go programming. Before we talk about the second edition, let's start with the first edition. How did you get to be the person to write this book? What's the story there?
It turns out knowing people is a useful thing. Like I said, I've been starting programs when I was in elementary school, and I had like programming books for my Commodore 64, like, mapping the 64. Like every memory location was described for a computer. That was amazing to me. That was great. I always kind of wanted to write a book, and I had actually approached Riley independently a couple of times. They said, "Don't call us, we'll call you." Then I spoke at a conference in New York in 2017. Met someone who was on the Go team, Carmen Ando. We got to talking. Met up with her again at another Go conference in Canada. And I mentioned in passing, let's write a book about Go. And then I was at GopherCon that same year. Carmen said, "The editor from O'Reilly is down the hall. I told her you're the perfect person to write this book. Go talk to her."
Nice.
And so I met Zan. We went to a baseball game that night. The Giants were playing San Diego, and we talked about it. She said, "Give me a proposal." And I did. And that was the beginning of the book.
Very cool. It's just sort of like fate kind of coming together, it sounds like. Kind of from both sides, it worked out.
Yeah, just got to make your own luck, I guess, in some
Yeah.
things. Just like talk to enough people and be in the right place. And things will happen.
Cool. Now, of course, you know that I've reviewed your book on my YouTube channel. I've written a review of it because I was looking earlier this year, 2023. I was looking for a book I could recommend to newcomers to Go that was up to date. And yours came to the top of the list because it was almost up to date because you included generics, which there have been some really great books about Go. I'm sure you agree. But many of them are really outdated, especially as quickly as Go changes. And, generics were added just a couple years ago, and we've had modules added fairly recently, and, other big changes like that. So yours came to the top of the list of ones that I would recommend to somebody learning Go. But as you pointed out, after I published that review, there were some, I don't want to call them mistakes, but some inconsistencies in the chapter about generics with how generics finally landed in Go, because you wrote the chapter before the final release.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that this is one of the motivations for the second edition. But why don't you tell me in your own words, why the second edition?
So the first edition in generics was actually, I actually spoke with a couple of people on the Go team and had them review the book about generics chapter in particular and say, "Hey, is this right?" They said, "Yep, this is great." Publish the book. They said, "Oh, by the way, we changed our minds." And then I had the revised edition, then I updated it so it was correct. But it's like,
yeah.
So the book was successful. Like, everyone, one of the first things that the editor at O'Reilly warned me about is like, "You're not going to get rich writing a book." I'm like, "Oh, I know that." That wasn't a concern of mine. But then it did really well. Like it was in the top 5, top 10 at O'Reilly on O'Reilly Learning for months.
Wow.
I'd sit there and like check the popularity numbers. Like, this is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd get feedback. People say, "Hey, I'd love it if you had more examples," or I'd like watch your features being added to Go. I'm like, so much to write about that. And I eventually just wrote a letter to O'Reilly editor and said, "Hey, are you looking for a second edition? There's some things in here that I'd like to be able to fix up, some new features that are coming out." And they said, "Yeah, we'd like a second edition." So I said, "Great." And so there were a bunch of things that had changed in Go. Fuzzing support was added. They cleaned up some of the unsafe stuff, actually. Workspaces being added for modules. I never really liked the first chapter. I wrote it. It was like the first chapter is the first part of the book I wrote, and I went back and looked at it and said it was actually a pretty bad introduction to the language. So I went back and wanted to do that. Go's tool environment, like all the great tools make Go great to use. I didn't even really talk about them. So that felt like it deserved a chapter. There were a couple examples where I was like, these aren't really good examples. People asked for things like exercises, like they wanted to like be able to test their knowledge, and they wanted like more code samples to work from. I'm like, those are all really good ideas. So I should probably do those. And so it was a great chance to go back and tweak things, expand things, some topics I didn't quite cover the first time.
Yeah, I saw a pre-release PDF version of the second edition, and it looks a lot fuller. A few things are rearranged. There's a lot more information. It looks like a really good edition from my perspective.
It's about 100 pages longer.
Yeah.
Of text. So
didn't
feel like that when I was writing it.
Did it feel worse? Or you feel more or less?
Less. I'm like surprised. Where did those extra 100 pages come from? Like, there's a 30 pages of new chapter. I don't know the other 70 pages came from.
How much time did you spend? Maybe first on the first edition. How long of an effort was that?
It was a year. I started work in September 2019. November 2020 was about the time that it was done, and then it was released in March the following year. This year was about the same amount. It was about a year for this also, but it was a lot less pressure on me. Like for the first book, it's every night, 5-6 nights a week, a couple hours in the chair, just writing or not writing or staring at it and trying to make the words come out. But this time I was like, I can take a couple days off here and there and get things going, and the schedule was still about the same, so it was not so bad.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So obviously the first edition wasn't such a stressful experience that you're not doing it again, because you did volunteer to do it again. What's it like? What's it feel like writing a technical book like this? Does it bring you joy? Is it stressful? We'll leave that open-ended.
I think it's a lot like having little kids, where you forget how bad, when you're going through, it's like, oh my God, this is awful. And then after a while, like, oh, so you get so nostalgic for it. My kids are almost grown. Yeah. So at this point, I can be nostalgic for when they were little and kind of forget some of the times when it was not as awesome. Like when it started off, it was great. As the first edition was going on, towards the end, it was kind of a slog. I was like, I just have to finish this. In fact, one of the reasons for a bad example in the concurrency chapter, the last example in the first edition, I wrote it. One of my reviewers wrote back to me and said, this example is not very good. And I was like, I am so done with this book. I don't care. I'm just doing this example. and then I was going to do a talk based on concurrency for a users group. And I started to pull the text out of that chapter, of course, to make my slides for the talk. And I'm like, oh my God, this example's awful. Why did I let this get into the book? And the reason was I was just done.
Yeah.
So the second edition, it was much easier pace. So it was less that feel for stress. There was none of that needing to prove myself. Like, this has to be a good book. Like, some of the initial feedback I had from the first few reviewers on Learn and Go for the first edition was they thought they were getting something like effective C++ or effective Java. They didn't understand what the book really was. No one really wants to read a book like this. So that was like, that's not really great feedback when you're first starting out. But now with the second edition, like, I know there's an audience for it. So it feels better. It's a little bit easier to do this because, there are people who do want to read it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how has the second edition writing process compared to the first? You said it's easier or less pressure. Has it been tough? Are you going to look back and be nostalgic again, even though it's been difficult this time around? Or was that the first edition sort of thing?
This wasn't so bad, actually. I think I had no moments of, oh my God, please make this end. It was more, no, it was mostly me trying to make sure I'm covering things enough, not getting too verbose, make sure I'm covering the right topics. I wanted, for example, to include a section on templates in Go, because as far as I know, there's no great documentation on templates out there. And I thought, I get this couple of pages in the tools chapter, and I start writing it. I'm like, no, this is like at least its own chapter. And it's like, I have to pull it.
That's almost its own language on its own, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's Turing complete, right?
Yeah.
It has loops, it has...
Yeah. So do you think that will be your next book, Go Templating?
I don't know. I've been wondering what to do next. If I'm going to do maybe little topics on Go instead of trying to cover a whole book each time. Because even with this one, I was trying to be very good at delayed publication until 122 because of the new features with the 4-range loop, where it creates a new value each time. And then they sneaked one more thing into 4-range functionality after I was done with the book. And so I missed that. So the people who don't know, 122 will let you do a 4-range up to a number. So you can say for I : range 5, and it'll count from 0 to 4. That's not in the book, but I found out about that a little bit too late to make it in there.
Yeah. All right. That means there's going to have to be a third edition. Are you going to sign up for that one too?
We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. You got to wait at least a couple of years to let them add enough new things, and then break your book right at the last minute again.
Maybe if they add some types, maybe that'll be the time.
There we go. Yes. All right. Jumping back to first edition. One of the things I thought was interesting when I was reading the first edition in writing my review is you spent 2 pages talking about Complex 64 and Complex 128. And I have never met anybody, to my knowledge, who's ever used either of those data types. Have you?
No. In fact, I tell people not to use it.
Yes. So I'm a little bit curious, why so many pages, so many words on these features that should be used? I mean, it's worthwhile mentioning, of course, because they're there. But you spend a lot of time, more than I think any other book I've read on the topic.
Part of the reason is because no other book talks about it.
Okay.
There's also a bunch of pages on GoTo.
Yes.
And does it deserve 2 pages? Probably not. Not in the first edition, where it's out of 300 something pages. But now it's 100 pages longer, so it's the same number of pages in a smaller percentage of the book.
Yeah.
I think I can kind of defend it a little bit by saying it's interesting that Go included this. There are you see a language and there's thought process, what should we put into a language?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is Ken Thompson would be kind of cool to add this in there. And people who make languages, they put stuff in because I think this might be cool, and they can be horribly wrong. And also, why is this still in there? Because it's not worth removing it. And just because you see a misfeature in a language, just ignore it. It's okay. So I can justify by saying, there's a corner here. It should know that they happen.
All right. I'll buy that. At least I've used GoTo, I think, once.
I almost used it in an Advent of Code problem this week, and then I decided not to do it.
Yeah. I've certainly seen it used a few times. As far as actually using it myself, I think once. But all right. Well, I like that explanation about Complex 64 and 128. On that topic, one of the questions we like to ask all of our interviewees is, if you were forced to remove something from Go, what would it be? And I don't want to make it too easy. I don't want you to say complex numbers because that's off the table. We're already assuming that that's going to go away sometime. What else would you remove from the language?
Dot imports.
Oh, yes.
This actually came up at work as a problem for a library that we're using. But yeah, dot imports are just a bad idea in general because the whole point of imports in Go is you have this namespace before it from the package name that you're importing, that you're able to actually look at your code and know this came from somewhere else. Now, a dot import just pulls that stuff into your current namespace, and that's horrible. It doesn't really solve. They've been trying to solve that same problem with the aliases later. I'm not sure what the actual thinking was on dot imports being added to the language. Besides, probably it seemed like a good idea at the time.
I was recently bitten by dot imports on a legacy project I was working on, and I tried to create a symbol. I don't remember if it was a function or a type or whatever. And it was called, I can't remember what it was called. It was called slug, S-L-U-G. And I couldn't do it because it conflicted with an import name in a different file in the same package. Or it wasn't an import name, it was a dot import. Something dot imported that same symbol in a different file in the same package. And it took me a while to figure that one out.
Yeah, it's so against the spirit of Go that it's surprising it made it in there in the first place. And it can't go away now, right? Because you'll break the language because there's 3 files out there in the world that are using it.
Exactly. The Go 1 compatibility promise, I love it and I hate it at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad they found a way around it with the for loop stuff for 122.
Yeah, I agree. So let's flip that question around. If you could add something to Go, what would it be?
So this is something I'm actually trying to do right now. Maybe this help me make my pitch for this thing to happen.
All right.
So like I mentioned, I work for Datadog. We do system monitoring. And one of the things that I work on is a team that does traces. And for a lot of languages, you can just add the tracers, OpenTelemetry or Datadog, either is fine, at runtime, and it will start generating traces out of your application. And for Go, you can't really do this easily. So there are some things that people do that are kind of horrible C-level hacks or eBPF hacks, and that lets you get access to compiled code at runtime and start instrumenting it automatically. But they're horrible hacks. And in Go, really the better way is just to do it at development time. But the people who care about monitoring systems are the people who usually write the code at larger companies. So it's hard to get the people who write the code to put that stuff in the first place. So it would be nice if there was some kind of built-in support for things like tracing in the standard library. And I've actually been playing with some ideas around how this could be added in a way that would be not agnostic. I'm not trying to build in like Datadog support into the standard library. I'm trying to build tracing support into the standard library. Related to this would be the plugin application binary interface. Go does support plugins on Linux. It's not used a lot. And one of the reasons it's not used a lot is because the ABI isn't stable. So for a plugin to work with an application, they both have to be compiled with the exact same version of Go down to the patch level. And that's not feasible for anything that's public.
Right.
So if they would stabilize that ABI, it could do a lot of very clever things with plugins to let you extend the application at runtime. That would, I think, add things like trace support would be very nice. Other functionality that could be added at runtime and let Go have some of that support that you have in other languages.
Really cool. Yeah, that would be nice. So is your proposal specifically about the plugin ABI, or is it about adding tracing support and that sort of a dependency on it?
The focus is on the tracing support, adding just bake into the language, into the standard library, the HTTP server, the HTTP client, and the database libraries. So it's like the ability to report back out that, yes, something happened here. And then how do you get that back to the thing that's listening to your code? You need some sort of plugin mechanism at runtime that you could attach that would do that. And the plugin API is one possibility. Maybe looking at Seago is another way to do that, but Seago is kind of a dirty word. So
Fair enough. Yeah. All right. Well, Jon, I'm really glad you came on today. It was a pleasure to meet you. Let's talk about how people can find the book and find you and anything else you think that they should find. Maybe this proposal. Maybe there's not a link for it yet, but
not yet. Soon. So yeah, social media. LinkedIn is probably the place where I can be found the most. I'm on Mastodon barely. Other social media I don't really use, but LinkedIn. Look for Jon Bodner. I'm there. The book is available from O'Reilly. If you go to O'Reilly Learning, you can already see the preview copies of the book. It's already the second edition preview is actually really popular. I'm, again, pleasantly surprised. It'll be available in bookstores in January. Amazon already has it on the page for Learning Go that there's a newer edition coming out. Should be mid-January for that. The first edition's been translated into a bunch of languages already. I assume the same thing will happen with the second edition eventually. So for people who are non-native English speakers, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Polish, I think was done. So yeah.
Well, I'm excited for the new edition of the book. I'll probably be doing my own updated review of that one beginning of next year. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you for reading and reviewing and having me on here.
Thanks for coming. It's been a pleasure. I hope to stay in touch.
Thanks.
All right.
Likewise.
Until next time.
Bye.